West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, l'âge tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire,
Caroline, I would just remind folks, because it feels like it's been 7,000 years since this story first burst into public view, but it burst into public view with an extraordinary filing from Jack Smith. And in that filing, Jack Smith annotates the call and response and the violent threats Trump made against people like Rusty Bowers, I think, is in there. Chris Krebs, I know, is in there. And the names are redacted. But what special counsel's office tries to establish before Judge Chutkan, before her ruling on a partial gag order, is what we all know to be true. When Trump attacks someone and calls for violence and demonizes them and dehumanizes them, threats almost always ensue.
Absolutely. I mean, Nicole, this goes back as far as 2016 and 2015 when Donald Trump was running for president. You'll remember those moments in a stadium in Louisville, Kentucky, where he called upon his supporters in that stadium to get him out of here, I'll pay your legal bills if you get into any trouble. And we watched a black protester of Donald Trump questioning his Islamophobic remarks and raising questions about some of the white supremacy arguments he seemed to be favoring. We watched that black student be forcibly pushed and shoved and thrown out of the stadium by Trump supporters. It was sort of not just a call and response that took a few minutes, it took a few seconds. And it happened again while he was president. It happened again while he was now a candidate for re-election and facing legal challenges on multiple fronts. And Nicole, I don't think it's unimportant to mention that there have been attempts on FBI agents' lives as a result of Donald Trump's time in office, when he repeatedly tried to say that the FBI was coming for him and politically motivated in investigating evidence that his campaign had had contacts with Russian assets or operatives, and that there was some sort of political fix-in to look at his campaign and try to target him, when really what FBI agents were looking at was the possibility that the Russian government was trying to pierce that campaign and use it to defeat Hillary Clinton and support a candidate who was definitely much more pro-Russia than Hillary Clinton.
Well, and Andrew, P.S. Russia did. Russia was. Volume 1 of the Mueller report does establish that Russia very much did get involved in the 2016 election. I want to turn to something that, because I think I struggle so much with the fraught consequences of platforming Trump, maybe hasn't been illustrated adequately. But since he left office, Trump's association with violence has increased. I mean, he's had Nick Fuentes to Mar-a-Lago for dinner. His opening campaign event was in Waco, I'm sure not by accident, and the video was a glorification of the insurrection. His position is that he will pardon the insurrectionists. They've been convicted by juries of their peers of crimes as serious as seditious conspiracy. His ties to violent acts now match his adoration of violent rhetoric.
Absolutely. So, you could add to the list that Carol so aptly cited the events on January 6th. And to your point, Nicole, which is, even if you were to give the former president the benefit of the doubt that that's not what he intended on that day, and I say very much the benefit of the doubt since there's lots of evidence that's exactly what he intended, he clearly has embraced it since then. In other words, he did not have the reaction that any normal person would have, which is that this is absolutely a real strike against democracy. I would point out, though, for the legal issue for the Court of Appeals that will be evaluating what Judge Chutkan did, it's not so much that he is running for office. It is that he is a defendant in a criminal case. And there is longstanding court precedent, including Supreme Court precedent, that a trial judge is entitled to protect the administration of justice, and that does not trump the First Amendment. Think of this as a thought experiment. Even if you thought the defendant did not intend his words to cause violence, but he knew that, in fact, people would take them that way, the judge is entitled to say there are going to be limits on what you can say because we know that violence can ensue, and we have seen it ensue. So I think here the record before the Court of Appeals will be very strong, and the fact that there's also the state record of his former President Trump making statements about a law clerk, I think is really not going to sit well with judges in the Court of Appeals.
Let me show both of you what New York Attorney General Letitia James said outside of the courthouse in the last hour. Obviously, her civil fraud case is on trial now.
He's called me venomous. He's called me disgraceful. He's called me radical. He's called me a racist. And this is only week 3. The reality is that none of his behavior, which can best be described as performative, will change what's happening in the courtroom. We are here to enforce the law, and nothing will change that. No attacks, no words. I will not give in. I will not give up. I will only serve justice and enforce the law. Thank you.
It's extraordinary. And if you, again, we don't always amplify them, but Carol, the attacks against Attorney General Letitia James are only rivaled, I think, by the attacks against DA Fani Willis. They are as vicious as the attacks against Jack Smith, but they do include those words that she said, attacks that are venomous. He calls them disgraceful. He calls them radical. He calls them racist. He calls them pro-Obama. I mean, the smears on these Black women trying to hold him accountable, as they would any of the three of us if we did anything he is charged with doing, are next level.
Yeah, and it's interesting is a euphemism for it, that so often it's Black women that are targeted by Donald Trump as almost like a prop for his claims that he's being targeted. Interesting that the election officials who testified in the House January 6th investigation were, in tears, describing how their lives had been ruined. Their sense of fear in their own homes was so high they were afraid to come out as a result of his targeting them personally in Georgia for doing things and corrupting the election process, which obviously it was proven they had no such role in that. I think it's worth underscoring, too, Andrew's smart point about the extensive precedent for judges' role in protecting their court proceedings. There's one world in the political battlefield where Trump is allowed to say a lot of things. His First Amendment rights are pretty broad in his effort to seek a return to the White House and to the Oval Office. But in a courtroom, if anything, Judge Chutkan has been pretty generous in her gag order in terms of allowing the former president, to continue to claim that this this prosecution is politically motivated, to continue to bash the Biden administration as calling the shots in this field. That's a lot of room for him to say what he wants to say in a federal court case in which he is the defendant. His picking on a court clerk in the New York case, again, a female, is not going to sit well, but it's also really beyond the pale. Most judges I have seen literally threaten, as I think I've said before on your program, Nicole, to duct tape the defendant if they keep having this kind of behavior.
It is Thursday, the 19th of October of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. A little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. Just a little. Can't have too much. Well, can you ever have too much? Yeah, you could. Alrighty, so we could, I guess, ruminate about wars around the world. And I suppose we will, because I can't help but wonder how much input one Vladimir Putin has in all of this. There has been some reportage that the Wagner Group may have been involved in training, not necessarily boots on the ground, but some training for the October 7th massacre. And it would be right up their alley, too, because they've done it in Syria. They've done it in various parts of Africa, not to mention Ukraine or other parts of the Donbass. Mm-hmm. They have a well-known track record, even though their leader, the caterer guy, is, well, he's been, I don't know, vaporized? Did they get vaporized? Nah, probably just blown up to smithereens when their plane crashed at speed. After, I guess, somebody saying they were playing with hand grenades inside. Yeah, let's throw live hand grenades back and forth inside a plane 32,000 feet up. Maybe that's what happened. But I still just cannot help but notice some of the techniques that were used in Syria, parts of Africa, and elsewhere were utilized in the massacre on October 7th. I'm just saying. I don't want to get too conspiratorial there, but I bet we'll find out. This missile attack on the hospital, I think that is coming out, and pretty much what some of us suspected in the very beginning. Could have just been the stupidity of war and what happens when mistakes happen. Accidents. Boy, they were, I gotta say, the mobilization of getting that, propaganda, the PR, whatever you want to call it, from that event was pretty damn quick. Just saying. Don't let a tragedy go to waste, apparently, when you can utilize it to, redirect the fact that how many 1,200 more people were massacred on October 7th? Just supposed to pretend that is a glitch in the Matrix? Okay. And then on a lighter note, you got Marjorie Taylor Greene standing up like on the third floor, I don't know, the rotunda. Is it a rotunda? It's an outside viewing area way up on the Capitol, up top. And she's like being like imperious. I am the imperial queen. Yelling down at protesters saying, let's have a ceasefire and get some mutual aid into Gaza. She was calling that an insurrection. Her idea of if 10 or more people gather, that's an insurrection now. Because, you know, her people who tried to violently overthrow the United States of America, who are now being incarcerated in jail for doing such, were just simply protesting. No, they weren't. Give me a break, lady. And let me just tell you, her supposed embrace of, you know, the Muslim cause was belied right there. Okay? The way she handled that group of protesters. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, you know, if 30 grandma knitters showed up for the Grandma Knitting Guild and went to the Capitol in D.C. and started chanting, free the skeins. You know, a skein is like fabric. Yeah. Free the skeins. Let the pearls go. Pearl is like a kind of stitch. Knitters out there know what I'm talking about. Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene would call that an insurrection. There are people out there and they want the yarn to be free. Must be an insurrection. That's how Nazis think. So, I've said it before and I'll say it again. We have our work cut out for us because apparently the young'uns, you know, I'm not trusting anybody under 50 or around 50. Maybe I'll just not trust anybody around 50. But then you got the Berbert lady. What's she, like mid-30s or something? I don't know, maybe between 30 and 50. Don't trust anybody until like they've, you know, proven their worth, their intent, their moral, whatever. Got to prove it. Because right now I'm thinking somebody failed in establishing any kind of moral clarity in the world. Is it all supposed to be transactional? I am not going to give anybody any help unless I get mine. What's up with that? Well, at the same time, pontificating as if I'm not. But anyway, pontificating. Oh, all those people, they don't know how to be religious. They don't believe in God. We need to put God back into schools. We need to put God back in America. Well, that would be nice. It would be nice because the only people who say that they want that to happen are pretty damn godless in their behavior and their actions. I wouldn't even say they have good thoughts. A lot of bad thoughts there for all the hate, murderous behavior, you know, I mean, actions. And their thoughts are just equal to their actions, and they're just bad people, you know. They want the apocalypse to happen, and I guess if we follow their construct in this Dante-esque story about the end of the world. Notice how the end of the world only encompasses Western ideas of the hereafter. I'm just saying. But anyway, if we follow their construct, Donald Trump is the Antichrist. Right down to the orange makeup. I think they even said something about orange pancake makeup. Beware of false idols wearing orange pancake makeup. Now, I know you could argue that they never said anything about the wispy comb over, okay? They just didn't know what to name it. Or at least it wasn't able to be translated from the Aramaic into Greek. Maybe that's what the problem was. What is that on top of his head? Oh, it's a wispy comb-over. What? Can't translate that into Greek from Aramaic, I'm telling you. Pretty damn tough. Now, I know there's going to be some Greek scholars out there in entomology that will say we actually have a term for the wispy comb-over. Okay. But I'm not going to go there. I'm not. Alrighty. Well, why don't we give you a rundown about what we have in store for you in the curated part of the salon we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Trump's embrace of violence since leaving office is not too dissimilar when he entered the 2016 campaign. You know, just saying. Let's get rid of all the Muslims. And if we can't get rid of them, let's lock them up. And he was going to also. On the rest of the menu, a Republican lawmaker from Iowa received credible death threats following her vote against Jordan for Speaker, and law enforcement is investigating the matter. Well, you know, Trump's embrace of violence trickled down. Trump's lawyer is not only incompetent, he's literally unqualified to appeal the gag order in the D.C. court. Yeah, he's not a member of the bar. Oops. And a Texas city settled a lawsuit over their police response to Trump supporters who aggressively surrounded that Biden bus in an attempt to run it off the freeway in 2020. The wheels of justice move slow, but they move. After the break, we move to the chef's table where German Chancellor Olaf Scholz strongly condemned a firebomb assault on a synagogue in Berlin. And the failed referendum on indigenous rights has set back the Australian government's plans to become a republic. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link that is, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the left there is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could send us what you might spend on, an espresso-type coffee drink. How about that? If you could send those funds to us once a month, we're able to then pool those funds with the like-minded funds that have been sent our way from like-minded folk like you, and then we pay our bills, because that's what we do here. We're not listing $32 million mansions in D.C. for sale. Jesus, like Brett Baer. Nope. We are trying to do, honest and maybe funny work, but more important, resistance to the hostile takeover of representative democracies, not only here in the good old USA, but around the world. And your recurring patronage has helped us achieve that in whatever small measure. But it is important, and we also want to extend a big thanks for your generosity in allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many years ago. So thank you. Yeah. Okay, long way of saying that we could use the money, because we could. And thank you for those of you who have been sending it to us, because it is very encouraging. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those. Thanks, Tom. You can follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Tumblr, Instagram, Facebook, etc., etc., etc. And in most cases, and almost all, it would be at Justice Putnam. In some cases, just simply Justice Putnam, but you know what to do. So I suggest that you follow my social media feeds, because that's where I put the links that to the show notes and links diary that I post on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime. And that way you can actually read the actual reportage from the actual reporters of the articles that we draw such great inspiration from here at this salon we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. So you have easy access to those links if you follow my social media feeds, so I suggest you do. You can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Really, wherever podcasts can be found, just, well, not on Stitcher anymore. All right. Let us now tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and it is by Matthew Chapman from Raw Story. Representative Marionette Miller Meeks, a repug of Iowa, has received credible death threats following her vote against Jim Jordan for Speaker of the House, and law enforcement is investigating the matter, reported Political's Olivia Beavers on Wednesday. Now, she revealed that on Twitter, and I looked around for some other articles, but I think Matthew Chapman here at Raw Story puts it together rather succinctly. Miller Meeks, who did not reveal the specifics of the death threats, is one of a small group of Republicans who initially voted for Jordan, but changed their vote to a no in a later round. Jordan, a hard right ally of former President Donald Trump, was nominated for Speaker by the GOP after House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, who was initially selected over Jordan, bowed out of the race. Just a day after Scalise was nominated, it became clear a small contingent of far-right lawmakers would hold the line against him and prevent him from securing the necessary votes. Nearly 24 Republicans have voted against Jordan, leaving the speakership vacant and the House paralyzed after the historic vote of a small faction of Republicans to oust Kevin McCarthy from the role. In a statement, Jordan's spokesman, Russell Dye, condemned the violent threats and harassment against members who opposed him. "This is abhorrent and has no place in civil discourse." Dye winked. I'm sure he was winking when he said this. "No one should receive threats, and it needs to stop. We have condemned these actions repeatedly. It is important that Republicans stop attacking each other and come together," Dye said. You know, when you think about, legislative comity, the last person I ever think about is Jim Jordan. Give me a break. Apparently there's been some email or DMs back and forth between the wife of a legislator and whoever, an anonymous intimidator. And I got to tell you, it looked like a lot like John Barron, right down to the misspellings and the bad grammar. Oh, here it is right here. Miller Meeks is not the only anti-Jordan Republican target for harassment. The wife of Representative Don Bacon of Nebraska was deluged in angry anonymous text messages demanding she persuade her husband to change his vote. In a very interesting and pointed way, I might add. Sounded like John Barron. This comes after an earlier report that Fox News' Sean Hannity has been quietly trying to whip votes for Jordan behind the scenes, sending messages, pressuring GOP lawmakers in Biden voting districts, and implying they are responsible for the House's dysfunction. Matthew Chapman of Raw Story brings us this next offering here at the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Trump's attorney John Lauro hit a snag in his effort to appeal the gag order against his client. Reported The Messenger yesterday, Wednesday, a federal court has notified them he needs to be admitted to the court bar in order to do it. In a letter to Lauro on Wednesday yesterday, the clerk of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit said Lauro must first join the court's bar before any of his filings are accepted, reported Darren Samuelson and Steve Riley. Our records reveal that you are not a member of the bar of this court, said the letter, adding, "It is the policy of the court that all attorneys appearing before it be members of the bar of this court. Our rules do not allow us to accept filings from attorneys who are not members." Lauro told the Messenger that this is a routine matter and that he plans to join the court's bar, said the report. "I've been a member of the D.C. bar and the federal trial court bar for nearly 40 years, Lauro told reporters, not telling him why he's not now, of course. Why? "This is a routine request from a federal appellate court to join its bar, which I will do in order to represent President Trump in this important matter," Lauro said in a accent totally made up on the spot. This comes after federal district judge Tanya Chutkan approved the order earlier this week at the request of federal prosecutors. The order prohibits Trump from disparaging special counsel Jack Smith and his family, witnesses, and officers in the court in the case, but does not prohibit him from publicly discussing or disputing the case in general. The hearing in which Chutkan made the decision went disastrously for the former president and Lauro, with Chutkan at one point laughing in Lauro's face after he said the gag order was unnecessary because the current restrictions on his client were working. Legal experts have suggested that Trump's appeal of the gag order is unlikely to succeed. Of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Texas city on Wednesday yesterday agreed to a $175,000 settlement with passengers on one of President Joe Biden's campaign buses in 2020, including Democratic member Wendy Davis, who accused police of ignoring their calls for help after a caravan of Donald Trump supporters surrounded them on a highway. The episode took place just days before the November elections as the bus approached Austin. Video that circulated widely on social media at the time showed trucks with large Trump flags driving close to the bus, which had campaign surrogates and staffers on board, but not the candidates. A lawsuit filed by Davis, a former state senator who ran for Texas governor in 2014, and the other passengers accused San Marcos police of ignoring acts of violent political intimidation and abdicating their responsibility by not sending an escort despite multiple 911 calls. And they were all made from the bus. Under the settlement, the city of San Marcos also agreed to give officers additional training that includes principles of giving individuals a voice and being neutral in decision-making. They didn't want to go help them because they were all maggots, with probably Proud Boys and Oath Keepers among their ranks. The intimidation we experienced on the highway that day and the threat to our safety simply for engaging in the political process and supporting the candidate of our choosing should never happen in this country, Davis said in a settlement. I should remind folks, the video that was circulated widely on social media showed these trucks trying to force the bus onto the shoulder of the freeway, which would have toppled it over. San Marcos City Manager Stephanie Reyes said the city continues to deny many of the allegations in the lawsuit. However, she said the response by police that day did not reflect the department's standards for conduct and attention to duty. Filings in the lawsuit included text messages and transcripts of 911 calls. The lawsuit alleged the city officials and police violated an 1871 federal law called the Ku Klux Klan Act, originally designed to stop political violence against black people. The law has also been cited in lawsuits following the deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Well, that brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Hi, this is Your Health Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
We bring you the latest vital health news, discoveries that affect your body and your mind.
And we break down the medical research to help you stay healthy. I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
We're Scientific American's senior health editors. On today's show, we're doing a refresher course on COVID. Fall and winter usually see a peak in virus cases, so we thought it would be a good time to talk about where we're at. That means knowing where COVID is spreading, how to stay safe, and when you should test yourself.
You know, I really haven't been worrying much about COVID for months now. It was summer, it was warm and nice outside, and the public emergency ended last spring. Cases seemed low, so I wasn't thinking about the disease all that much.
Yeah, me neither. I've had a nice little break from COVID for a few months now, really, but the virus is still there and, it's continuing to spread, so I'm starting to get my mask out again.
Yeah, a friend of mine just caught COVID for the third time. Another friend has been sick with it for 3 weeks, and it's getting to be fall and winter seasons when the virus has peaked in the past.
Yeah, COVID isn't quite a seasonal virus yet, but it does seem to follow some seasonal patterns. It spreads easily when people are indoors, like we are much of the winter. And when you add in holidays and kids going back to school, it's the perfect viral storm.
So one weird thing is these friends of mine, the ones who got sick, have been texting back and forth, arguing over the best time to use home COVID tests and a bunch of other stuff that I thought we had a better handle on last year. I think now we've forgotten some of the basics. So to catch up, we thought we'd talk to somebody who's been tracking the virus and public health for the whole pandemic. Caitlin Jetelina.
I'm an epidemiologist and publisher of Your Local Epidemiologist. I do a lot of contracting work with the CDC, also adjunct at University of Texas Health Science Center.
Your Local Epidemiologist is a newsletter that's become a go-to source for hundreds of thousands of people because Caitlin explains COVID research in plain English and turns it into advice for readers trying to figure out how to stay as safe as they can.
One of the first things that I wanted to know from her was, how do I know if COVID cases are rising in my community so I can take extra care? And here's what Caitlin said.
Yeah, this is really challenging to do, especially on a local level. I particularly know a lot of other epidemiologists are focused on wastewater.
Wastewater is sewer water, essentially. If people are infected with the virus and use the bathroom, that virus gets flushed down the drain. Then scientists can test for it. So if levels go up week after week, it means the virus is spreading in the community.
For example, in San Diego, we have a fantastic wastewater system for viral surveillance. But really, you just need like a regional kind of trend because wastewater is good for looking at trends. And so if that trend in your region is increasing, then like you said, you're going to start hearing more and more people getting infected. The wastewater dashboard I use is BioBot. It's pretty, it's straightforward.
BioBot is a company that works with public health agencies to monitor viruses in the water, and they do have a pretty nice trend dashboard on their website, which you can Google. Be warned, though, it doesn't get super local. For instance, I'm actually pulling it up on my phone here now, and I live in Maryland, so I'm looking there for the county that I live in, and it's not listed. It's just not there. What about you, Tanya?
Let me take a look and see if they have one for Brooklyn or Kings County, where I live. But I do not see anything, and I don't see anything for New York City, so the closest one is Nassau County in Long Island.
So wastewater isn't perfect. There are gaps in BioBot's coverage, but there are other programs that might fill in. And wastewater is better than some other indicators.
Yeah, like the number of people testing positive for the virus or case rates. Caitlin doesn't think those numbers are very reliable anymore.
So as we left the pandemic emergency, as fatigue has certainly crawled in, people are stopping to test. So certainly case data is not anything I would pay attention to.
She did mention something new, which I hadn't heard about, which is a way to look at COVID and the flu together.
We're going into the fall winter season, and there's going to be a lot of crap out there. And so one thing I know the CDC is updating, which should be in the next week or two, is a respiratory map by state.
The CDC has long had a tracker for flu-like illnesses, but during the pandemic, they had a separate tracker for COVID. And now that's changing.
That COVID number is going to be folded into this respiratory outlook. And I'll probably be using that to really determine when to wear a mask, for example, because I don't want flu or RSV or COVID or norovirus or whatever is out there.
Another thing that I wanted to know about was what to do if you think that you've been exposed. I know Caitlin said a lot of people don't do rapid home antigen tests anymore, but plenty still do. So you get a call from a friend who you just had lunch with, and she says that she just tested positive. Should you test yourself?
The tests are most accurate at detecting infection once the virus has had a few days to replicate in your body. So the advice from the FDA and the CDC is to wait 5 days after exposure and then test.
But Caitlin pointed out that there are a lot of times when you don't know the exact time or the day that you got exposed. And also that with the new variants, viral load seems to build up more slowly. So it might be more useful to wait until you actually start seeing symptoms, like a runny nose, cough, a fever, the usual COVID stuff. And then wait out a few days of those before going ahead and testing.
So you shouldn't take a home antigen test during the first 2 days you feel sick?
Yeah, third day, it may start increasing your viral load. But yeah, those first 2 days, there's a high likelihood of a false negative on your antigen test.
Good to know. So when COVID is on the rise, what's the best way to keep yourself safe?
Wear a mask. Like, I have 2 toddlers I need to take care of. I'm traveling all the time for work. Like, I just don't have time to get sick. And so I wear a mask. Wearing a mask helps protect you. It helps protect those around you. Taking an antigen test a couple days after symptoms. Getting a vaccine. I mean, just go get your vaccines by Halloween. You may get infected, but you're not going to end up at the hospital.
So that's the advice from your local epidemiologist. We're not in the same place we were in previous years, but COVID is still a risk. We have the tools to protect ourselves. Let's use them.
If you want more info on how science tracks viruses in wastewater, we have a short documentary on that. There's a link to it in the transcript for this episode.
It's fascinating. Take the plunge.
Your Health Quickly is produced by Talika Bose, Jeff Delvicio, Kelso Harper, Corinne Leong, and by us. It's edited by Ella Fetter and Alexa Lim. Our music is composed by Dominic Smith.
Our show is part of Scientific American's podcast, Science Quickly. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you like the show, give us a rating or a review. And if you have ideas for topics we should cover, send us an email at yourhealthquickly@sciam.com. That's yourhealthquickly@sciam.com. I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
See you next time.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. A new report chronicles a brain drain of experienced professional election officials who, after dealing for months on end with false election fraud claims, intimidation, and burdensome new election integrity rules, have had enough. Pro-democracy group Issue 1 analyzed Western state data and news reports and found that 98% of Arizona voters will vote in precincts with new election officials since 2020, and that 12 of 15 counties have new officials. Colorado lost a combined 314 years of experience when election officials in 24 of 64 counties stepped down. Election officials cite an increasing workload, threats, and a frustration with activists. An Arizona county election official told Women's News site the 19th, "The reality is there are a lot of people who don't want to know the truth. They've continued for almost 2 years with the emails, going to public meetings, and heckling from the audience." In an interview with Issue 1, Nevada Secretary of State Francisco Aguilar said, "Nevada has lost more than half of our top county election officials since the 2020 election, and many more staff within election offices across the state. This has led to a critical loss of institutional knowledge and staffing shortages ahead of the 2024 presidential election." We have Issue 1's full report linked from AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2013. That was the day that 2 workers on California's Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART as it is more commonly called, were struck and killed by a train. Christopher Shepard was a BART track engineer. Lawrence Daniels was a contract employee. Both men had years of experience working on the tracks. They were inspecting the tracks when they were hit and killed. Workers who usually operated the trains were out on strike. The Amalgamated Transit Union Local 1555 and SEIU Local 1021 had walked off the job the day before. The strike disrupted the daily commute of 400,000 Bay Area travelers. The unions were on strike for improved wages and safer working conditions. The union wanted bulletproof glass for station agent booths for worker safety. They also asked for improved lighting in the tunnels. According to an article in Mother Jones, quote, a BART spokesman called the safety issues a smokescreen, arguing that contract negotiations were not the place to raise them. In response to the strike, BART was training a replacement worker to run the train when the tragedy occurred. The manager, who was supposed to monitor the unexperienced driver, had left the car. In addition, the National Transportation Safety Board found that BART had no way for workers on the tracks to communicate with the drivers. The family of Lawrence Daniels sued BART, which settled for $300,000. The union and BART settled the strike 2 days after the tragic deaths. The union won nearly a 16% pay raise. The union also won safety upgrades, but management won concessions on employee contributions to medical benefits and pensions.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays, a little bit of jambalaya, a little bit of spice in your life. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 48 degrees Fahrenheit under foggy conditions. We're expecting highs in the mid-80s today, about the same as yesterday. Some clouds this morning will give way to generally sunny skies for the afternoon, and we'll expect mist and reduced visibility at times while we're under these early morning foggy conditions. Winds will be light and variable, then clear to partly cloudy overnight with lows in the low to mid-50s, winds light and variable, and then partly to mostly cloudy tomorrow. Highs around 83 or so with winds light and variable. And then Saturday late, looks like we'll start having some rain moving in with a bit of it falling on Sunday and Monday. So once again, we look forward to that. Ragweed pollen is in the moderate range here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 29 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is moderate at level 3. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.04 inches. Visibility is down to a half mile, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 65 degrees and cloudy with an advisory for potential disruptions due to heavy rain. Paris is 71 and mostly cloudy with an advisory of potential disruptions due to thunderstorms. Rome is 77 and mostly cloudy with an advisory on potential disruptions due to heavy wind. Kabul is 56 and clear. Kyiv is 51 degrees and cloudy. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 68 and clear. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 64 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 62 and sunny. Chicago, Illinois is 58 degrees and cloudy. And New York is 60 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Kirsten Drieshaber of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz strongly condemned a firebomb assault on a synagogue in Berlin on Wednesday, saying, "We will never accept when attacks are carried out against Jewish institutions." Assailants threw 2 Molotov cocktails early yesterday at the synagogue in the center of the German capital, police said, as anti-Semitic incidents in the country have been rising following the violent escalation in the Middle East. Police said they were investigating an attempted serious arson in which 2 people approached the synagogue on foot at 3:45 in the morning and threw the firebombs, which burst on the sidewalk next to the building. The 2 people, their faces covered, ran away. A couple of hours later, when police were already investigating the incident, a 30-year-old man approached the synagogue on a scooter, which he threw aside and began running toward the building. When police officers detained him, he resisted and shouted, anti-Israeli slogans. The building complex of the Kahal Adas Yisrael community in the center of Berlin houses a synagogue, a kindergarten, a yeshiva school, and a community center. Police said there were riots overnight between Muslim immigrants and police in the city's Neukölln and Kreuzberg neighborhoods and at Berlin's landmark Brandenburg Gate, in which several officers were injured. Germans are particularly sensitive regarding attacks on Jews or Jewish houses of worship because of the country's Holocaust past. Almost 85 years ago, on November 9th of 1938, the Nazis, among them many ordinary Germans, terrorized Jews throughout Germany and Austria. They killed at least 91 people and vandalized 7,500 Jewish businesses. They also burned more than 1,400 synagogues. The pogroms, which became known as Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, preceded the Holocaust, in which the Nazis and their henchmen murdered 6 million European Jews. Following Hamas's brutal attack on Israel on October 7th and the subsequent war in Gaza, police have increased security for Jewish institutions in Berlin and all over Germany. Still, Israeli flags that were flown as a sign of solidarity in front of city halls all over the country have been torn down and burnt. Several buildings in Berlin where Jews live had the Star of David painted on their doors and walls.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Rod McGurk of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Australia's failed referendum on the Indigenous voice has set back the government's plans to cut the nation's constitutional ties to Britain's King Charles III, a minister said today, Thursday. Australians last week overwhelmingly rejected the referendum that would have enshrined in the Constitution an Indigenous Advisory Board Parliament. The loss reduced the chances of another referendum soon to make the country a republic with an Australian president as head of the state instead of the British monarch. Queen Elizabeth II's death last year at the age of 96 was widely seen as increasing Australians' mood for constitutional change to a republic. The Voice referendum was Australia's first in a generation. Australians rejected an Australian republic in their last referendum in 1999. No referendum has succeeded since 1977. The weekend referendum result had also triggered a backlash against Indigenous rights in 2 states where the no vote was strongest. In Queensland, where opposition to the Voice was strongest, the state opposition party reneged on a commitment on Wednesday to support negotiating a treaty between the state and Indigenous residents. Opposition leader David Crisafulli explained he had hoped that a treaty would lead to better outcomes for the Indigenous population, but the referendum convinced him that a treaty would create further division. South Australia had the second strongest no vote, and next year will become Australia's first state to introduce a state-based Indigenous voice. Lawmaker Sarah Game, who represents the minor One Nation Party, introduced a bill to the state legislature this week that would repeal the legislation that created the state voice. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.